Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today to our second Saturday seminar. Today we have Dr. Barbara Auris with us, and she is the ESL coordinator and an ESL faculty member at Montgomery County Community College. And today she's going to talk to us about brainstorming. Dr. Auris, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for this opportunity. And good morning, everyone. It's such a lovely day out. I'm glad you took some time to come and talk about brainstorming. So if you were here last month and with Dr. Kapoor, she gave a really interesting discussion about academic integrity in higher education. And I'm going to do something completely different. I am going to be working with you in hopefully a discussion so that we're learning more together. I will share a few things I've learned, but I'm hoping that together we can really come up with some really good ideas this morning that might invigorate and encourage us and energize us through the next couple of weeks. So what Bill doesn't know about me is that my first teaching job was in 1990 as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Central African country of Gabon. And to say that I was underprepared and underdeveloped to teach a high school English class is an understatement. I was overwhelmed from day one. And the fact that I had no textbook and no internet access made it even more challenging. But I did learn that through talking to colleagues, you can learn an awful lot. And that's why I'm hoping that we can learn today through our discussion. One of the most challenging language skills for me to teach is the academic writing, the composition skills. And I find them challenging because for me, they're very personal and they're internal. And in some ways, they're a little mysterious and insightful. So when people ask me, how do you brainstorm? Sometimes I don't know that it's an unconscious thought. And in fact, I've just graduated in 2017 with my EDD. And of course, I had to write a lot of papers. And my friends would see me sit down and in a 6-hour push, just type out an entire paper from start to finish. But what they didn't see, what was going on in my head for the week prior, that not only had I brainstormed internally, but I had done my first and second and even my third draft internally. So by the time I got to my computer and sat down and typed, there was a lot had gone on behind the scenes. And I find it very difficult sometimes to work with my students because I'm trying to teach them what I'm doing behind the scenes, and I'm not even aware of that all the time. So that's why I found teaching brainstorming to be so challenging. And so when I was a new teacher, can you imagine what I did when I was getting to the topic of brainstorming? Absolutely nothing. I skipped that page. I didn't know what to do, so I just skipped the page. Eventually, through talking to colleagues, through getting more education, I realized that was not the best answer because through brainstorming, not only was I able to generate ideas, but I felt a lot less anxious about the writing process. And I'm not sure about you and your situation, but when my students walk into an academic composition class at Montgomery County Community College, their anxiety levels simply go up as soon as I say the word writing or composition. So brainstorming is super important to help them to just calm down a little bit. I also found that a lot of my students, if we had, say, a 90-minute classroom period, they would spend half of that time just trying to think about what they wanted to say. They were totally unfocused with their thoughts. And then they were rushing through the actual writing process. So I knew I needed to work on something that not only helped my students generate ideas and feel less anxious, but to get really focused. And ultimately, I wanted them to recognize that they had something to bring to the table. They are not that tabula rasa. They're not that blank slate. They come to the table with something. It might not be English, and it might not be academically oriented, but they have something to bring to the table. And I wanted them to recognize that. So with all of that in mind, I decided to teach brainstorming. And I was out of the Peace Corps by then, so I had my computer, and I looked online, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of ideas on how to get students to brainstorm well. And I would go into the classroom with this great idea. I'm sure this has never happened to you. I had this great idea and the most perfect lesson plan you could ever imagine, and it would flop. And I had no idea why for the longest time. So I would pick myself up, I'd clean off that lesson plan, I'd shine it up, and I'd try it again in another class, and again we would flop. So I would go back, try something else, and it was very discouraging. And eventually I could see, I got some data and I could see some problems. And ultimately I was asking the students to do something that they had maybe never done in their first language. I'm asking them to do it in a second or a third language in an academic setting with high anxiety. So it took me a while, but I figured this is not working. I need to prime the pump a little bit. I need to prepare my students to brainstorm. So I'm going to share a few of my ideas, but we're going to be doing some discussion now. So I hope that we can actually do some brainstorming on brainstorming today and walk out of here ready to tackle it. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, and you're just going to do this in your head, is we're going to talk about the topic of brainstorming. And I'd like you to think of 2 or 3 vocabulary words that jump into your mind when you hear the word brainstorming. You don't need to write these down. Don't need to put them in the chat. You don't even need to say them just yet, but put them in the back of your mind. We're going to pull them out in just a few minutes. Everybody got something? Okay. When I did this exercise with my students, it was a flop. They didn't recognize that they knew anything. I would have 1, maybe 2 students come up with 1 or 2 vocabulary words. Whether I did this individually, in pairs, or small groups, it just wasn't working so well. And it ended up that I did 95% of the work. So I decided to try something different. Now I'm going to try to share my screen. While I'm trying to share my screen, I'm going to tell you that on the screen, you're going to see 8 vocabulary words. I don't think this is going to work, but anyway, we're going to try it.
You're co-host now, so you should be able to share.
I know. I'm not seeing anything. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I am. Are you seeing a screen yet? Okay, then we are going to do what I often do in my classroom and go to plan B.
You can send it to me and I can share it.
I sent it to you.
By email?
Yes.
I believe you, and I'm going to get it and I'm going to share it for you.
Anyway, I have 8 vocabulary words that I found on thesaurus.com when I looked up the word brainstorming. And I'm going to read those words to you. And I'd like you to, after the word, decide if that would be something that you would include on your list, or maybe you would not include on your list. Okay, so here we go. So number 1, I'm going to go through this quickly. Number 1, delusion. Oh, it's slide number 4, Bill. Number 2, visualization. Oh, there we are. I don't have to read them anymore. So of those 8 vocabulary words that are on the board that I looked up in thesaurus.com, I'd like you to choose your top 2. The 2 words that you think are most connected to the topic brainstorming. And this is where I invite you to unmute and tell me your choices.
Ideas and inspiration.
Ooh, all right, we got a vote for ideas and a vote for inspiration. Who else is going to put their 2 cents in?
I chose
I
creative
would go for.
and sorry.
All right, I
No,
heard
you go
another
ahead.
inspiration and a what else?
I said creative and inspiration.
Creative, okay.
I would say visualization and inspiration.
All right.
And
Billy,
I said,
last one.
ideas and visualization.
Excellent. Okay. So inspiration seems to be a big one, and visualization. I agree. Oh, and ideas was a dumb one. I threw mine in. Mine was creative and inspiration. So we'll add that. Okay. Are there any words on my list that you think are really they shouldn't be there when you're talking about brainstorming?
I think all the other 4 that we didn't say.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah, I promise you, these came from thesaurus.com, and I was shocked to see the word delusion on the list. Possibly because delusion has a negative connotation, and I think of brainstorming as something as positive, but I'm not sure delusion is the best one. The word fancy was a noun fancy, not the adjective fancy. So like you have a fancy, meaning a crazy idea. Mirage, and I'm not sure I want to inspire daydreaming in my classroom, so I didn't quite like that one, but I put it up there. So my next question is, remember when I asked you to think of 2 or 3 words that jumped into your mind when you thought of the topic of brainstorming? Are any of your words on my list? And if so, which ones? And if not, which ones? I see Lori shaking her head. Go ahead, Lori.
Creative was one of my words.
Okay, creative was on your list.
I'm not sure if it's my morning brain, but I was thinking of like a couple of words like mass amount of information. I don't know.
Yes, yes. Okay. Messy information.
Sorry, like mass, like a large amount.
A mass. Oh,
Uh-huh.
well, I'm going to add messy because that was on my
Okay.
list.
Okay.
Mass, a large mass. Okay. Yeah. When I think of brainstorming, I often see the mind map with all those arrows and the circles and everything pointing. All right. So far we've got now some vocabulary, and instead of asking my students coldly to come up with some vocabulary words, we would go through this kind of an exercise where I would give them some words somewhat related to brainstorming, and we could talk about them. Making sure they understand what the words mean. I've used very high level words because I'm assuming that we are all high level English speakers of some kind, whether first or second or third or whatever. So now that we've got your list and we've got my list, can anyone come up with a new word? Is there any word that these words that we've been talking about inspire in you to come up with as another idea?
I have organization.
Love that one.
I had organization too.
Oh, you guys are my favorite
Mm.
students, right? I love talking about organization. All right, so when I asked my students just out of the blue, come up with some vocabulary words, it didn't work so well. But when I first of all gave them a list and we talked about some of the things, it often helped them make connections to ideas and words that they already had. So the next thing I did, which was related to how I organize, is I think about questions that I would like to have answered. And on the next slide, you can see I would put up the question words for my students, the 5 W's and the H question words. But again, if I ask my students just coldly, come up with a question about the topic of brainstorming using the question word who, and another one about what, and another, it kind of works sometimes, But again, I needed to prime the pump. I needed to help them prepare just a little bit. So on the next slide, you can see that I've taken the question word who, and I have modeled a number of questions that you could ask about it. Now, if I was in a lower level class, maybe instead of an advanced level class, a beginning level class, where a lot of bandwidth in their brain is used to form questions. It's not an easy thing for them to do. Instead of asking them to create questions, I might create a question and then scramble it and ask them to unscramble a question. Or I might give them the key words and ask them to create a question. I might give them a little bit of help. But for you guys, I'm not giving you any help. So what I'm going to ask you to do right now, again, in your head for a moment, is I want you to come up with 2 questions related to brainstorming using the question word what. So I've given you an example of some who questions. I want 2 what questions from you. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about that. All right, so other than what is brainstorming, because you all probably have that as your first question, is anyone willing to share a question that they came up with about brainstorming using the question word what?
I have one.
Go ahead, Bill.
What impact does brainstorming have on student writing compared to students who don't brainstorm?
Oh my gosh, I could have paid you to ask that question because the next slide is what a great segue. Thank you so much. Right?
I didn't peek either.
I believe you. I believe you, Bill. I think our minds work alike. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Any other question, Lori?
I just had, what do you do after you finished brainstorming?
Excellent. All right. There are so many of them. Go ahead, Teresa.
What topic is needed, or what is the topic that you need to brainstorm about?
There you go. So, all right. There's tons of them, right? And we are native speakers, so we really we don't have bandwidth problems making questions, but this is a great way to not only ask questions, and then I often tell my students, from these questions, you can start to get organized. You can start to figure out what questions are you going to answer in your paper, your essay, your paragraph, and it's very helpful. So up to this point, really we're talking about vocabulary and getting some general ideas about brainstorming or whatever the topic is. Before I move on to some more academic ideas, does anyone have a comment or a question about this method of getting the students to interact with the idea of brainstorming?
I like it.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk about, that's great. We now have a general idea of the topic. We have some vocabulary words. Some of the students in the class might even be talking about it, might even express a little bit of interest. But I teach academic classes. My students are going on to to earn a degree of some kind. So they need to write in an academic format. So the next thing I do on the next slide is I bring in some research. So guess what? I found an article about brainstorming, and I asked my students some questions about the actual citation first. I want them to recognize that there are things you need to learn from a citation before you even read an article. So we talk about the number of authors, when it was published and why that's important, how many pages it might be, and the name of the journal. These are things that are new for many of my students. They may not have been exposed to citations, so this is getting them prepared for the academics. But this is not enough, because on the next slide, you'll see that I have the abstract of the essay. And I have used bold print not only to help my students, but to help us, because we don't really have time to read all through this, right? But I asked my students to talk about the kind of study that it was. And in this one, it's a mixed methods. Well, we can talk about what that is, because when they go out and do research, they need to know about quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods. Right? How many participants there are. I do not talk about, the n equals 26. I just tell them what that means. We don't worry with all of the academic vocabulary so much at this point. And then particularly, what was the result? So now we've taken our topic. We've gotten some vocabulary. We've generated some questions. So we have some ideas of what we might want to do. And now we've started looking at what other people have written about. And I try to choose things that are easily understood. For example, in this actual abstract, there's things like ANOVA, two one-way, and I would not include that. I would delete that part for my students because they don't need to know that. But you guys all know what ANOVA is, and the N, and all of those things. Great. I'm hoping that my students are not only getting ideas, but they're also thinking about critical thinking. They're thinking about how someone has studied this topic in an academic format. So we're ready to move on. And now I want them to think about how they would say something that someone else has said. So I try to find some paraphrases related to the topic, such as this one. I don't know who Tom Monaghan is. I don't think he's a famous person. But you can see that he compares brainstorming to the drilling of oil wells. And I don't assume my students know what that means, but it explains a little bit more. The only way to strike oil is to drill a lot of wells. So we make sure we understand what that means. Again, paraphrasing is an academic skill that they need to work on. Even though this is not an academic quote, we can still work on it. And to make it a little easier, for the first one, I give you some choices. So if you go to the next slide, you'll notice that you have a choice of what this means, either A, B, or C. And if we look at some of the keywords from the paraphrase, and we look at some of the keywords in your choices, well, I'm going to ask you, what do you think the best paraphrase is? Is it A, brainstorming is quick and easy? B, brainstorming takes time and hard work? Or C, brainstorming is not too important? And everybody knows that the answer is
B.
B. B. Thank you. We think if you see the only way to strike oil is to drill a lot of wells, it seems like it's a lot of work. So brainstorming takes time and hard work. We might discuss how we made that best selection. So now we've done it in an easier way. So paraphrasing, great skill. We're still in the topic of brainstorming. And I hope at this point that their brains are starting to really get energized, because the next slide, they have a paraphrase, but I'm not giving them some choices. I'm asking them to paraphrase. So imagination is more important than knowledge. Now you notice the word brainstorming is not in there, but we have the word imagination, which is related back to one of our vocabulary words, the visualization and the inspiration. So we might pick out the key vocabulary words. We might go on thesaurus.com together. We might write, and we would definitely write a paraphrase together. So we might come up with the idea that learning data and information is not as key as having creative ideas. So now we've gone from not just some vocabulary, not just some questions, but we've actually gone out and looked at what people have done in the academic field writing about this. And now we've started to generate some sentences that we might actually use in our own writing. But of course, only if we cite that. So now we get to the last part. On the last activity is I try to find a visual that has something to do with the topic. And I ask the students to describe the visual and then connect it to the topic. So if I were to ask you, you're my students right now for the moment, and I ask you to describe this visual, Bill, what do you see in this visual?
I see a lot of confusion in the first picture, and then I see through the second and third heads, kind of that confusion unraveling and becoming clearer until finally it's completely unraveled and we have the light bulb, the idea.
And a light bulb, meaning an idea, is a very cultural construct. So we might decide that when you see, like in a cartoon, when someone has a light bulb above their head, that means they have an idea. So we'd have to explain that. So now we have this visual that's gotten us thinking about the topic. And we might actually take a moment in class to write a little bit about this visual. Again, Bill described it really well. And it's interesting. Bill talked about the first head. Which one is the first head for you? Which way is it going? Right? Go ahead, Bill.
It's the left because we come from a sinistro-dextral writing system.
Well, there you go. But not everybody else does. So when you say the first head, we got to make sure we know what we're talking about. So in class, we might do this little, when you do this 5-10 minute writing activity, it's not for a grade, it's just to get some things on paper. Ask students to describe it and then connect it to the topic of brainstorming. And Bill did that very well with his idea of unraveling the thoughts. Okay, so if you can get us out of the slide share now, Bill, we'll go back to our group here. Thank you. Okay, so I am not sitting here saying that my ideas are the best ideas that you could ever come up with, and they work 100% of the time, because they don't. And I often chop and change and add things and subtract things and tweak things. But I hope that through this mini presentation, that maybe we've come up with some ideas and some energy and some encouragement to do a little bit more with brainstorming. And I'm going to try on my Tuesday morning class. I'll dedicate it to you all. I'm going to try to do something fun with brainstorming with my intermediate level students. So I'm going to end my discussion and ask if anyone has any comments, questions, or great ideas that you could add, because I'm here with my pen and paper ready to write anything down.
Well, since I saw no one else, go ahead, Sinead, do you want to start?
Yeah, yeah, no problem at all. So I guess, would you say that brainstorming is a skill that we have to kind of build with our students? Because the way it's always been presented with me is, we give them the mind map, you give them the main topic, and they try to, put in like the mini bubbles and things like that. And for me, that just helps with organization. I wouldn't say like it builds a skill. So yeah, I guess my main question is, would you say it's a skill that we need to start building in students, like critical thinking?
That's an excellent question. I do believe it is a skill. And it is something that gets easier and better with practice. But like I said at the beginning, when I brainstorm, it's very personal and internal, and I'm not totally aware of how and why I do some things, which is why I found it really difficult to try to teach someone. So as you see in my presentation, I tried to break things down into smaller parts, starting with words, moving up to sentences, moving up to short pieces of writing, because that's the way my brain works. When I'm given a mind map, I sometimes draw a blank. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's awful for me. So I think it's a skill, and I like your idea of building that this is something I probably would not do in one class period, but I would do pieces of it throughout a number of classes so they get more and more comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Thank
I think I'll try doing that, like a more approach like that instead of, I usually do the simple mind map, but I think it's not that effective.
Well, let's stay connected and let's share what's working.
Sure, definitely.
And I'm excited about this because this quarter, Shanae and I are teaching the same group of students. So
Yeah.
we can have kind of a two-pronged approach to this, coming from me teaching writing and Shanae teaching reading to the same group, which is exciting.
Yeah, that could be really interesting.
So I want to share a frustration that I've had in teaching brainstorming, throughout the years, and one thing that I've done to solve it. So right now, Shanae and I are teaching the level 5 at ELC, and that is like B1 plus. So they're really writing the 5-paragraph essay for the first time. They had done paragraphs in the level before and kind of built up to an essay. And the textbook we're using is Final Draft, which I was sentenced to since Great Writing had already been used. And that's my preferred one. And one of the things that frustrates me about all of the texts and kind of the general approach that people have been taking to brainstorming is this idea that we can sit and generate this list of ideas first. Because and it's true, we tend to be writing at those levels about topics that we already have ideas on, school uniforms, what can we do for the environment, things that we've already thought about. But then when I'm teaching my upper level students and also teaching first year writing and even my linguistics courses in the university, I see that people tend to continue with that way of thinking and flush inquiry down the toilet. And teaching this idea of, exploratory research becomes incredibly difficult when students have been taught all of their lives that we generate all these ideas first, and then we put together our case for the argument that we've come up with in our head. And in grad school, we learned that you have to read a lot of literature and you have to go in with an open mind. And so one approach that I've started to take, and I couldn't do this with my level 5 class, is we start at the databases. And I say, databases can do brainstorming for you. You don't always have to do it because they will guide you there. And the place that I typically send them first, I'm sorry, this is a long comment. The place that I tend to send them first is Academic One File, which uses the Cengage Gale interface. And I have them just put in one keyword that they want to research or 2 keywords that they want to research. And then I have them click on this button called the Topic Finder. And the Topic Finder gives you almost like the equivalent of the mind map, and it shows you how many academic articles are in this particular database with that topic. And if you click on one of those keywords, it then spreads it out further and gives you more. Now, it's a fairly small database, but if they can just get, they can kind of see where the academic conversation is and where it's gone, etc. They get down to maybe 1 or 2 articles, then I send them out to Academic Search Complete to start searching these new keywords that they found, and then start clicking the keywords that have the highest hits that are most interesting to them. Now they've got even more. And then I say, find the article that you think is kind of the archetype, what best reflects your topic. I have them put the title of that article into Google Scholar and then click cited by and see who has cited that, and also see what related articles come up. So I try to get them to come up with this pool of articles first, and then say, all right, now read abstracts and figure out where you're going. And that tends to work well with my native speaking students, my kind of, or my first year writing students, whether they be native speaking or not, if they're buying into the idea of inquiry. But so many of them just fall back onto that old, I'm going to come up with an idea in my head, then I'm going to come up with my 3 claims, and those are going to be my 3 body paragraphs, and then I'm going to find evidence to support what I already think. And I think it goes against the spirit of higher education.
Mm.
Now, Dr. Ars, do you have any
I
comments on
love
these?
that. I love that. You're really teaching them how to be a scholar and to think in a scholarly way rather than a student. Yeah. Wow. Wonderful.
So I guess the question that I have for you and everyone in the room is, how do we take students that are at the upper level, whether they be ESL or, native speaking students, how do we get them to buy into this transition
Mm.
and start brainstorming in new ways that are more scholarly?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer for you. I am excited about your ideas, and I assume that some of your students do get excited, and those are the ones who buy into it. So
Right.
how do you package that excitement and get others involved? If you figure that out, you let me know.
And I suppose, how can that work hand in hand with the type of approach that you have?
Right. I must say that in my classroom, we're doing a lot of the work in the classroom, making sure that they can communicate in writing in English by giving them a topic and asking them to do it right there in front of me. I need to make sure that they're actually doing it, not AI, not their mother, something like that. But for the bigger topics, for the bigger assignments, I totally see that we need to change that mindset. So, wow, thank you. Teresa, you want to say something?
I just have a comment or a question. Like if you're saying if they came up with those 3 claims on their own, then like are they finding those 3 claims with just like their mind? They're not researching it, correct? So if they found those 3 claims and then asked them to use like a certain book or something that may have all those 3 claims in it, like to help them research in that particular book. I'm just thinking like, would that be something that would be okay to do, or because then they could reference the page number and I guess
Well,
they would have to look
yeah,
at what is
yeah.
the back, the index, and see if they find that word topic. I'm just trying to think of like, would that be okay? Would that be a good way to open up that the whole topic of them trying to reach out, not just lean on their own understanding, but just go forth to more research.
I don't know about Bill, but I know that when I do writing, I do a combination of this is what I think. And then when I go out and do research, I'm like, okay, I changed this idea. This is taking me in a different direction. So I do a combination of both. And I think it can work well together. I guess my only concern is that if students do the research first, are they just regurgitating information? And so there's the next step. Once you've got them to brainstorm and they've got something that they want to say, how do you make sure that they are saying it and they're not just copying what they found in that article that was really good that the teacher told them to find? So clearly, so then we get into the academic honesty and plagiarism rules and who's the author and is it your voice if you copy someone else's ideas, and on we go.
I mean, how I handle that, I'm very old school in this, is I have them buy a pack of index cards and then they take the information that they find and I say, any information that you think is good, highlight it, paraphrase it on an index card, and I give them the whole, source in the top, or keyword in the top left, source in the top right, page number in the bottom right, and then I forget what goes, the type of evidence in the bottom left. And then they organize them into piles, and then I have them read a pile, and then I say, write me one sentence that captures the spirit of this pile. That's your claim. And so I want them to do it that way. But I totally see where you're coming from. My worry, Teresa, would be that they would have an idea in their head and then go research it, and they would just stay kind of in their own bubble and not branch out. You know how people research politics, they know what side they're already on, and so they just Google and find more within their camp. And I don't want people to go that way academically.
Yeah, I'm reading a book called Think Again by Adam Grant, which is talking about think like a scientist rather than a politician. Because when you said politics, that brought that to mind. If you go out with an idea, you'll find lots of people to support you, but you won't even think about the opposite. So if you think like a scientist, you're looking for data on both sides so you can make the best decision. Well, I'm not sure if this was groundbreaking information by any means, but I know that when I interact with colleagues, I get energized and encouraged, new ideas. So as we were brainstorming on brainstorming, your brainstorming has helped me to brainstorm some new ideas that I can use in my classroom next week when I teach brainstorming to my students. So I really appreciate that. So I am finished for the day, unless you have any last minute comments or suggestions or ideas.
Well, Dr. Auris, thank you so much for coming and doing this. This has helped me because on also Tuesday, I will be using some of this in my class with a group of students who could really, really benefit from your approach. So
well, maybe we can talk after class on Tuesday. We'll send a couple emails and maybe we'll get a research project out of this. Who knows?
For sure. And thank you again, everyone, for coming. Next month on December 9th, we have Eliana Stanislawski, and they will be discussing the adult education program that they developed all by themselves. And so it is going to be incredible. And I look forward to seeing you all there.
Okay, bye everybody.